I'd like to follow up actually on some of the issues raised by previous contributions on the operation of Cuilta, and maybe use my time to focus on the underlying issue of our state approach to forestry in the last few decades and the legislation we have in place which supports it, the legislation itself that has formed Cuilta. We know that forestry can be a viable and important commercial sector, but we now know that also our forests are a vital source of climate mitigation for this country. And any state or semi-state body that fails to operate on that basis is in fact failing the people by placing profit ahead of survival, by placing corporate interest ahead of our nation building. In 2021, influenced strongly by global supply and demand imbalance, which created a series of supply challenges in key markets, Cuilta published record profits. Now, unfortunately for me, I sit on Public Accounts Committee, but I can't look at those profits because the Public Accounts Committee doesn't get to talk to Cuilta. We don't really have any serious budgetary oversight of the operations of Cuilta. There's very little Dáil oversight of the decisions that are made there. Pre-tax earnings increased significantly on the previous year to 159 million, and they recorded operating cash of 73 million. Their revenue earned in 2021 is 422 million, up from 285 in 2020. These are huge numbers. But in fact, Cuilta as a body for forestry in this country could be seen as a failure. It's no longer fit for purpose, and it should be either wound down or fundamentally reformed. The problem we have is this. The deal with Gresham House in fact fulfills the terms of reference in the legislation for Cuilta. It's a deal based on profit above all other concerns. The legislation for Cuilta sets out the following parameters for its operation: to carry on the business of forestry and related activities on a commercial basis and in accordance with efficient silvicultural practices, to establish and carry on woodland industries, to participate with others in forestry and related activities consistent with its objects, designed to enhance the effective and profitable operation of the company, and to utilise and manage the resources available to it in a manner consistent with the above objectives. So the language there is the commercial basis, woodland industries, profitable operation. In considering the deal made between Cuilta and Gresham House announced this month, I've had cause to review the approaches of other countries in the development of their own forestry sectors. And I have to say that was really an eye-opening experience. There are very few comparable examples of a body like Cuilta in other countries, whether you look just to the EU or outside the EU. I found it very difficult to locate any country that constrained its forestry work to the purely commercial in legislation. In fact, I wasn't able to find any where there was no accompanying body that simply looked at public good. It was difficult to find any example of a similar deal such as this with so little oversight from the political house in question and so little buy-in from the public. There were, however, quite a few comparative similarities between the jurisdictions that I looked at. Most EU countries and regions where forestry is successful and is growing, both as a commercial sector and as part of their climate strategies, have lots of things in common, both within the EU again and places like Canada, for example. They have broadly aligned approaches, and it is worth kind of outlining what those approaches tend to be. So, for one thing, they tend to identify that a nation's forests, those that exist now or those that are planned for, are a key natural resource. They tend to identify that natural resources are a public good and that the public, where possible, should retain ownership of them. They identify that the forestry sector is inextricable from our climate commitments, and therefore environment and biodiversity considerations must be part of every single piece of decision making, whether that be finance, whether that be biodiversity, whether that be land management. And they identify that almost all the forestry bodies, personally that I looked at anyway, they took what was very interesting for Ireland, a regional approach. So of course you have the examples like Canada where they took a federalised approach and then broke that down within their federal limits. But even in smaller countries, you can look at Slovenia, for example, places within the EU, they have strong local government. That local government has a huge impact on decision making within forestry. It's not a centralised system. It's not a body that lives, in the capital city and is decided upon. It's something that is developed with local people, with local communities and with local authorities and overseen by them. I don't think anyone in this debate is proposing that commercial forestry, where it is developed and led by sustainable practices such as continuous cover and native planting, should be excluded from our state objectives. To the contrary, as somebody coming from the construction sector, the supply of a renewable building material could only be in Ireland's interests, as we currently underutilise timber in the Irish construction sector. However, the narrow focus of Cuilta on commercial benefit, and indeed the legislative underpinning for Cuilta, does not meet with our current climate or commercial demands of the 21st century. As I said, Cuilta is doing what it says on the tin. It is operating for profit. It is imperative that Cuilta is removed or reformed to align with the principles of climate neutrality, and while we recognise the importance of natural capital, that we do not seek to reduce our investment in our nation's forests as an exercise in accounting. Forestry can and will provide significant income to the state through timber production, but it's also a pillar element in the fight to improve biodiversity, a means of capturing carbon, a space for health and well-being, and a vital habitat for our wildlife. Forests are absolutely vital for the future of our planet, and they improve the health and well-being of everyone, and with careful planning and expert management, our forests can and will continue to thrive and be a significant amount of our landmass. It's imperative that we listen to the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly on biodiversity and implement their recommendation that we consider the position of Cuilta. And I would also ask the Minister to consider that he now unpick the Gresham House deal by dissolving Cuilta as a matter of urgency. If it is less than 1% of our land, then we don't need this deal. It's not significant.